Good morning, students. Uh, Welcome back to lecture 12. And, it is the beginning of the unit 3, genomes and genome organizations. In this concept, the first few introductory lessons given is that they wanted to discuss more on C-values and C-value paradox, one of the fundamental concept in genomics and evolutionary genomics. And we will be covering a bit of repetitive elements in terms of DNA. What are the protein coding regions or gene coding regions in terms of exons? And what are the other non-coding regions of the DNA? That also an important in terms of regulatory aspect. Both are linked in terms of the C-value paradox. We will see what is it that. And then further chapters will cover in terms of C-value paradox, repetitive elements, non-coding DNA, or simply the junk. And you go up into how do you map a genome to a specific chromosomes. There are specific methods called in terms of physical mapping, mapping the specific genes to a specific location of the chromosomes. You use a specific techniques called as physical mapping. In this, you use the phenomena of genomic recombination process. The more closely the genes are linked on the chromosome, when the recombination happens, because the distance is less, the cut portion of the chromosome going into this gamete and the remaining gamete, usually the close related genes, they inherit together. That helps in terms of making physical maps. Based on that, how do you make genetic maps? What are the techniques available for mapping strategies? That was the first few chapters. We will be covering few lessons for unit 3. But given the time, I divided this lecture into one part. Part 1, C-value paradox, and part 2, I will talk about repetitive elements today in the next June class. So this we will cover in tomorrow's class. Okay. Welcome back to C-value paradox and repetitive lecture 12. So one of the important concepts in terms of fundamental understanding, fundamental of form and function, where the life originated. So we are looking into one of the father of evolutionary studies, Charles Darwin. He is the pioneer. He is a visionary. He observed things that's happening surrounding him, having a keen observation, and he observed that there is a commonality in terms of form and function. The legs do whatever, they do the same thing for walking or locomotion in humans or in animals, lower phyla, and the same way the eyes, vision, same way hands, wings. He observed that there is a commonality in the form and function, and he proposed that we evolved from small and simple organisms. It should be a kind of the visionary, you can see, without having any techniques, right? At that time, he didn't know about the genome, he didn't know about non-coding DNA, he didn't know about RNA, nothing he does know. But he just looking at the common sense, how the species looked, an observation, he deduced some hypothesis and he made some assumptions and he proved it with the facts, and that those are the facts. Still, you go into a genomic sequence with highly advanced technologies also, the facts remain the same. So what was he saying? What was we are observing from his time point of view, our time point of view? Nothing but we are looking at an evolutionary time scale here, where we are looking over a time span of billions and billions of years ago, and we are looking for evolution of the life. For example, leaving the chemical and physical forms, whatever formed in terms of the first atom, germplasm theory, leaving that, you start with the prokaryotes, you go with the eukaryotes. We are evolved from prokaryotes. We evolved from simple protozoans to complex organisms like Homo sapiens here. And in between, you go into insects, you go into worms, you go into mammals, and you go into flowers, plants in terms of flowering plants, and you reach in terms of the humans where we are here. But we exist, some of the species within the timeline, we exist in terms of here. The phylogeny is the values given here, 0.1, 0.3, 0.5. They are phylogenetic distance given a species. A highly distant, the difference will be variable. Even a close species or closely related species of fish, closely related species of protist, the phylogenetic distance is less, but there will be again millions of years apart. But still, you consider in terms of phylogeny. So looking on this, we looked into form and function of commonality. One common thing I look in other ways is that the prokaryotes are single cell organism, and coming on to eukaryotes, multicellular organism. coming into humans, complex tissues and complex organs. It is in terms of other hand, you can look, it's not the evolution of life per se. You are looking in terms of the time scale of evolution of multicellularity from unicellularity. So you are looking from one cell becoming to multiple cells. At the same time, each cell is divided into tissues and organs. They have specific function and cell type formation. And also in terms of morphogenesis, we are diverse morphogenetic species compared to lower organisms. So that is as simple as the example, right? That is simplified in the next slide. In unicellular organism, all tasks to survive and reproduce have to be performed by one and the same cell, because they are unicellular organism, nothing to worry. They have only one cell in the entire organism. It is made up of one cell. Whatever the cell or organism does in terms of the growth, in terms of reproduction, it has to be controlled by one cell and the same cell only. But if you take in the concept of multicellularity, that is the evolution that gives us the information of the complexity of the forms. One of the greatest achievements in the evolution of complex life forms was the transition from unicellular to multicellular organism, and within the multicellular organism, again, different cell types giving different form and function. So that is a fundamental understanding, right? If you look into one smaller organism in terms of lower phyla, how this multicellularity evolved, leaving the humans, you go into, in terms of phylogenetic tree, go into the primitive stages where prokaryotes are ending and then primitive eukaryotes are coming. You look into an example of how one cell becomes into several cells, or one organism constituting one cell to several cells. You look an example of an organism called Volvax. This is one of the protists. It's a beautiful organism. This is in Latin, it is called as a fierce roller, some Latin terminology, but forget about that. You look into these cells of the organism here, Volvax, simple as prokaryote, but it is again in terms of, there is multicellular here, not a single cell. It has different cell and you constitute, for example, we will see a little bit more in the next slide. For example, how it from the lower phyla, coming a single cell organism, Chlamydomonas, how Volvax has evolved, just increase in terms of developmental complexity. A term you look into that. In the evolutionary scale, there is only one Chlamydomonas unicellular organism. Given a timeline, it evolved into Volvax. Volvax is nothing but, it's from one cell, it divided into several cells. In these several cells also, there are two types of cell types. One cell type is called somatic cell types, that is in the outer layer here. There's nothing but multiples of single Volvaxes, that's biflagellate Volvaxes. They form this outer layer here. And another specific cells called reproductive cells have been developed. And two types of cell types, one reproductive, one somatic. And whatever in there, extracellular fluid is there between that. So the cell increased in number of cells from one to multiple, and cells into cell types, and in terms of the volume also it has increased. And the volume that is given here is called extracellular fluid, ECM, extracellular matrix. So nothing else. Again, you are looking at a kind of specific 2000 to 4000 cells here in the outer layer, and a kind of 16 reproductive cells here, constituting from one cell to the new cell. So if I am a genomic guy, we are looking into a form of functional genomics. You want to go in terms of the, what is the genome here? What is the genome here? What the genome in terms of trends, what happened here in between? What are the changes that constituted? What are the genes that first gave rise to in terms of the reproductive cells? How the reproductive cells evolved from somatic cell? You can ask the questions. That's the way people at the olden days, they don't have the NGS sequencing technologies. But given the timeline, if you can isolate some new novel protist or novel amoeba, you have the capacity to sequence the whole genome. That can be done in terms of functional genomics. You divide, you cut the Volvax into two parts based on the morphology you're looking. One second, my daughter is kind of singing songs. Okay, what I was saying about that, Volvax developed from single Chlamydomonas unicellular, a group of small multicellular organisms constituting of multicells. You go into what are the cells, what are the genotypes, you go into NGS techniques, You isolate, you go in terms of the cDNA library, or you go in terms of the DNA you want to see. But this technique, functional genomics, they isolated RNA from these species, somatic cells, reproductive cells. They went into the sequencing and they observed that there is specific pattern of genes, and they isolated the whole genome, assembled, and they looked into gene ABC, what gene constitute in terms of expression, in terms of the reproductive cells, in terms of the somatic cells. So they were able to identify that though the Volvax is a small protein, small organism, its genome is a bit complex, and at the same time it codes for 14,000 genes. Observe that the huge number of the genes that code for Volvax is not simple. 14,000 genes are there. And you remember that from the basic understanding that human body consists of millions and trillions of cells. Compared to a cell from one to another cell in the million, each and every cell will contain a constant amount of DNA. The DNA doesn't change from one cell to the other in terms of the quantity. The same way they were observing the genome in terms of somatic cells here, reproductive cells here, is nothing but both the genome content is same given the somatic reproductive cells, but where the expression of the gene ABC varies in terms of the gene A overexpression in somatic cell, gene B overexpression in reproductive cell, gene C overexpression in somatic cell. By saying that gene A controls the function of somatic cells, gene B controls the function of reproductive cells. So why I'm simply jumping from evolution to genomics, because I wanted to bring two concepts here. The first concept is that though the organism in terms of the evolution is at the lower phyla, its genes numbers are huge. In terms of the genome size also may not be simple. That brings you the fundamental for C-value paradox. What are those values? What are these paradox people are talking? So we will simply talk about in terms of the quantity of DNA in an organism per cell or in all cells is always constant for a given species. That was the fundamental understanding observed. Quantity of DNA in an organism per cell compared to cell, there is no variability. The quantity is common in a given species, that is saying that a constant value. Again, no two species compared to this given a species, no two species will have the same amount of genome, not the same genomic value or character. Saying that given a species it is constant, given two species it may not be, it is not the same. The amount of genome in terms of a given a character, it varies between species to species. That's one more point. So now we are not talking from Chlamydomonas to Volvax, we are talking in terms of prokaryotes to eukaryotes. In giving the simple terms of unicellular to multicellularity, giving the time of multicells or cell types in the humans, one can presume that in terms of, let's say I'm asking a question now, in terms of the genome size in prokaryotes, genome size in eukaryotes, what do you think of? What do you think of? There is a linear trend in the genome size, and also at the same time, what do you think of number of genes that are responsible for the growth and maintenance of the organism? Just think about that. Looking into prokaryotes, looking into eukaryotes, you go in terms of the evolutionary scale. What will be the genome size here? What will be the genome size here? What will be the protein coding genes per se, constituting one gene to one protein hypothesis? How many genes are there in amoeba? How many genes are there in humans? Think about that. In a common sense way, we think of that there will be a linear trend. The genome size increases exponentially. At the same time, coming on to the genome size, the number of genes coding from each organism will also increase exponentially, giving the varied functions of different cell types, varied functions of complexity. That is a common sense way you think, right? You think in terms of the number of genes that make, you need a lot of proteins to make the horn of the reptile ear, but you don't need that horn in amoeba, you don't need that genes at all. In amoeba is a single cell, just one plasma membrane, one few cells and reproduction and cell cycle, binary fission. Why do I need? I may need 10 genes that codes 10 proteins, 2 go with this, 2 go with that. I can conclude that. But humans, I may say I need 2 lakhs or 3 lakhs of genes that code for 3 lakh proteins. I may say like that in terms of looking into the common sense. You can ask the same thing in terms into asking that, assuming the evolutionary closeness, the closer the species, phyla or kingdom, the less variability in their genome size. We are talking about evolutionary trends from amoeba to human. Again, if you take in terms of humans to human, plants to plants, protist to protist, crocodile to alligator, given the same species, cheetah to tiger, we may not expect in terms of the variability of the genome. There may not be too much difference. Yes, absolutely, there is no too much difference, but there are few exceptions that we will see into exception that we will see in the further slide. So it's not always true that the more closely related in a species, the phyla, the genome variability will not be there. The genomes will look almost similar. That was the guess made, but it observed that it is wrong guess. For example, they were able to see that in terms of the genomes, we always talk about haploid genomic content because we are looking in terms of the evolution. We are comparing prokaryotes to eukaryotes. And we also know that the genome evolved from haploids to diploids in terms of humans. So if you are comparing humans to protists, you cannot compare diploid chromosome, diploid genome into haploid, right? So that's why we fundamentally compare genomes, taking only one set of the genomic content, that is only diploid, haploid content. So coming on to the assumption that the more closely related the species, there is less variability of the genome, but it is not always true, or it is absolutely not true. The guess was wrong. They observed that, however, when haploid genomic content is quantified, species-wise, phylum-wise, or kingdom-wise, they observe in terms of the evolutionary time scale, they observed enormous variation not only in phylum, within a group, within a species, they observe variation in the genomic content. What is that variation in terms of both quality and quantity? In terms of a phylum or order, there is a variation of approximately 10 power 5 times base pair compared to one species compared to one phyla. Sometimes it's 10 power 12 base pairs variability in the genomes. It is not always similar. And in animals taking eukaryotes, the variability is 3,300 fold, plants 1,000 fold, and some protist among the protist genome, protist 1 to protist X, protist A, protist Z. You look into that, compare protist from A to Z, you may sometimes find that 3 lakh fold change in the haploid genome size. So that basically saying that in evolution we evolved from simple to complex organism, and within the species or genus you cannot assume that the genome size will be constant because they are belonging to the same evolutionary scale or evolutionary phylogenetic tree and closely related species. That was not the case. So basically saying that we are keep saying that the genome and DNA content is constant, but we are keep finding the kind of evidences that you cannot say it is a constant. So if the Volvax has 14,000 protein coding genes, how about humans? How much humans will have? Compared to unicellular to multicellular, I may expect 3 lakhs, just like the protist variability. I may expect that, but when you looked into that, in terms of why I do expect that, why I expect, because one always expect with more cell types, complexity of the cell types, more and more number of genes are required. So the genes will correspond to different functions, regulations, adaptations, given the billions of evolutionary scale and species evolved, the number of genes should evolve. So basically acquiring more number of genes during evolution makes you a complex and fit organism, suggesting that a complex genome size. But it is not true. If you look into Volvax to humans, number of protein coding genes only I'm talking, it's 14,000 here approximately, but coming on to humans, we are approximately 21,000. So in the evolutionary scale, we are highly diverse, highly different from that, highly evolved, but the protein coding genes are nothing changed. Only 6,000 is absolutely not in terms of statistically any valuable data. You can look into that. Basically saying that though the genomes are evolved, probably in terms of the size, but whatever the genome codes for function or functional unit of the genome doesn't vary in terms of the complexity of the organism. That was already shown here in terms of not only Volvax and humans. You look into different phyla. You're looking from yeast, nematode, Drosophila, plant, and you go in terms of the laboratory mouse and humans. You compare the estimated amount of the genome size in base pairs. We go in terms of, there is a trend in terms of the genome size, 12 million to 2.9 billion. There is a general trend that the size increases, but that trend doesn't correspond to the number of protein coding genes. For example, So yeast has 6,000 gene only. In humans, you expect a linear trend. Okay, from 6,000 we went into 25, but you look in between. For example, this Trichomonas has 60,000 protein coding genes, and for example, rice has 51,000 genes. So basically, the size and complexity of the genome does not corresponding with the coding regions, protein coding regions of the genes. Okay, does it make sense here? Or you guys are following, or we are missing something here? Rishabh?
Yes, sir.
You are able to understand, or it's a bit confusing?
No, it's okay, sir.
Okay, we'll come back and we will recap it, and then we will take a break and then come back and repeat it again. So
Sure, sir.
coming on to the genome size, what constitutes the genome portion? The genome constitutes nothing but a kind of genome is divided into chromosome in eukaryotes specifically, and the genome consists of the genes and intergenic regions, coding genes, coding portion of the genome, non-coding portion of the genome, that is intergenic regions. Thus, we now talk the genome in terms of the coding and non-coding. We take an example here. The genome of an organism is the whole DNA content of its cell, including genes and intergenic regions. So the concept of genome moved from DNA, a complete set of DNA, and it moved into a specific concept where people started finding some non-coding DNA through experiments. They found out that not only the coding portion of the gene, there is a non-coding or intergenic regions of the genome is there. So when you talk about genome in terms of the conceptual evolution, you talk about genes and intergenic regions. In prokaryotes, there is archaea and bacteria. There is a general trend of linear relationship between genome size and genome number. There is in prokaryotes, yes, sometimes the number allows it to see that the more the genome size, the more the protein coding genes you can see in that. But coming on to eukaryotes specifically, there is no correlation. But in prokaryotes also, there is some variability. Some of the protists are highly variable. It's only an exception. In general terms, prokaryotes are okay to go with the genome size and number of genes. But however, in eukaryotes, there is no correlation between genome size and the complexity of organism. This is considered as a paradoxical, because that was the people who were understanding that the genome size should correspond to the number of protein coding genes. Humans should have at least 3 million or 3 lakhs protein coding genes, but we have only 20,000. So that is called a C-value paradox. Why is that? Why is the other region of the DNA that's called intergenic region? We know that this is a repetitive DNA, and it also controls a lot of functionality that we will see in the second half of the class today. This again, you're looking in a trend of the different genomes here. For example, you're looking in the genome size in eukaryotes, and you go in terms of amoeba, prokaryotes and eukaryotes, you look in that. But in eukaryotes, you look in that, you take human, you cannot put him above the onion. You cannot evolutionary in terms of the genome size. You cannot put them in a linear trend. The humans cannot come here in terms of the size. In terms of complexity, we are diverse, but in terms of the given the genome size, amoeba has the highest 686,000 million base pairs. And coming on to humans, we are somewhere here 3.2 gigabases, but Allium cepa is in terms of the genome size. So that's what the paradox people were looking. In terms of the variability also, again, there is no linear trend coming from prokaryotes to eukaryotes. In terms of the genome size, from lower to higher value, let's say this is one of the C value for a genome, it measured in base pairs. You look from prokaryotes to eukaryotes. You, in a general trend, you expect that viruses should be small genomes compared to humans. Humans should be again going the bar highly in terms of the linear trend. You should see the bar going out of this slide, but it is not the trend. You see the bars going haphazardly. There is a kind of ups and downs in terms of the genome size, but as such, humans are not having a variable size. They are a bit more, but within the humans compared to lower organisms, there is no trend in terms of the genome size. And the same corresponds in terms of the protein coding genes. That the genome size in eukaryotes is defined as C value or amount of DNA per haploid genome. For example, if you look in terms of the somatic tissue and germline tissue, right? The body consists of cells and gametes, reproductive cells, and reproductive cells are always haploid. They go in terms of fertilization, gamete formation, and the gametes are always haploid compared to the somatic tissue. For example, eye tissue, hand tissue, the somatic tissue is diploid, haploid and diploid. So the genome size is always looked in terms of haploid to compare the lower organism. And why the term is called C? It is called a C for a constant. The term is called constant for a given species or given population. And usually the genome size is measured in terms of mass in picogram. It may be sometimes measured in Daltons or total number of nucleotide base pairs given in the megabases. Okay, genome size measurements, they constitute of C values, and the C values can be given a denotion of following different categories of the measurements. You can go with any of these quantitative measurements, you define a C value. And it's okay. This people initially think that what is C stand for? It stands for characteristic, it stands for a complement, it stands for something else. But there is a discussion that they said it's nothing but C. One of the scientists was defining it. I'm defining it as a constant, nothing else. I'm afraid that the letter C, it stood for only constant, given that the DNA of a characteristic of a particular genotype is constant given the species that was observed. But with extensive genome analysis, they found out that it's a paradox. C value is always not constant given species, given the phyla. They observed that the C value given the genome size, it correlates with organism complexity, and it varies, and it is not always constant. That was the C value paradox defined, and the terms and nomenclature was given different by C.A. Thomas, the scientist in 1971. Given that the C values were assumed to be constant because genetic information is encoded by DNA, and DNA is maybe constant among species, but there is no bearable relationship to the presumed gene number. So though DNA is constant, but the gene numbers is variable. And what is the other DNA that is doing? What is other DNA? For example, vast amount of DNA that's not coding for genes. What is it doing? What is the non-coding DNA? People at that time, they were not able to understand the concept because the level of simplicity, level of understanding in terms of always going into DNA, and thinking in a concept that the more complex organisms evolve, they should be having a complex genome and complex number of genes. Doesn't work. That was considered as a C-value paradox. So what are the C values in terms of humans? We take in terms of the humans haploid gametes and diploid in terms of the zygote and haploids. Depending on the X gamete, Y gamete, XX, XY, we can give a specific C value, but don't need to go in deep into that. But look into the point that what are we are talking? We are talking about chromosomes here. We are talking about chromosome XX, similar XY, different male coming from a father and mother. You look into that haploid, diploid organism. You look in the genome size. For the haploid, you talk about single unit, 3 billion base pairs. If you go in terms of the diploid, you talk about the double the number. By variable GC content, variable density and mass, you can give different quantitative measures for the given genome, and at the end you can define a C value that constitute for haploid is 3.09. For diploid it varies. Haploid C value only talk about haploids, but within the haploid gametes you see that the zygote XY will have a C value different from that coming from the sperm or egg. It's a kind of in terms of the difference in terms of X and Y chromosome. For example, X chromosome is larger compared to Y chromosome, and given the base pairs of the chromosome, slight changes will be there. So the C value slightly changes. And briefly, I will conclude in 2-3 minutes about talking about what is this non-coding DNA, why it constitutes a large portion of the chunk of the genome, what you can deduce in terms of the functionality of that. Then we will take a break of 20-25 minutes and we will resume in terms of repetitive DNA. So basically our understanding DNA, RNA into protein, everyone in the pioneering studies, they are thinking, concentrating on only the protein coding genes, saying that they are the fundamental importance. But when they analyze the genome portion of the given species, either prokaryotes, eukaryotes, they were able to observe that the protein coding region constitutes only 1 to 2%. For example, humans here that constitute open reading frames that we discussed in last few classes, compared to the whole 98% of the genome. Then they were started questioning about, it's a surprisingly paradoxical that given that constituting the proteins, what is this non-coding DNA doing? Why it is so much of junk in a given genome? So then they were able to deduce, they were able to look more details into what are these constituents in terms of ATGCs, what are these elements in terms of the variability. They defined that it's nothing but they could able to see highly repetitive sequences in a given non-coding portion. There are some RNA genes, regulatory genes. There are some introns, intergenic regions, and untranslated regions. And further understanding of non-coding, we could able to say that the central dogma is not a straight line. There is a circularity. There is a different regulatory controls. RNA can control RNA. RNA can control proteins, and a lot of transcriptional mechanism have been identified. And also, why the paradox in terms of why the genome complexity doesn't corresponding to number of protein coding region. They were able to analyze the genomes. They were able to see that given a lower prokaryotes to humans, though the number of protein coding genes doesn't vary much, the consistent trend was observed that humans have a lot of junk compared to prokaryotes. Prokaryotes also have junk. The junk of percentage genome is only 10% compared to humans, that is 90%. So it's a C-value paradox. Why we talk? Because you should not consider only protein coding genes. You should consider in terms of the evolution of non-coding sequences also. That explains the complexity of organism, constituting that non-coding also has a lot of regulatory gene functions. That's what, coming on to a conclusion in terms of the C-value paradox, we thought that complexity of cell types gives more number of genes, but that's not the case. We found a lot of non-coding and repetitive junk DNA as more organisms are evolving. And if you look in terms of evolutionary scale, the humans, in terms of our junk sequences, repetitive sequences, we didn't get it just like that from by chance. Basically, these segments are coming from viruses and DNA present in the prokaryotes in the lower phyla. It is nothing but some, during evolutionary scale, lot of gene arrangement, gene segments have been transformed from lower phyla to higher phyla, and they constituted most of the junk portion of the DNA. That we will see in the further class after the break. That's what considered as a C-value paradox. Why is that? And C-value enigma, it's another term. It's nothing but paradox talking in terms of the protein coding DNA complexity of the genome doesn't match. Then they define that, yes, we found the reason for this paradox. We found this enigmatic choice. We found that you don't need to talk in terms of the coding genes. You need to talk in terms of the non-coding portion of the DNA. Then that makes sense that the C-values in general terms, C-value enigma relates to the issue of variation in the amount of non-coding DNA found within the genomes in different eukaryotes. Specifically, they talk in terms of eukaryotes only. Why is that? Fundamentally, prokaryotes, eukaryotes, genome organization differs, that we will see. So coming from what is C-value, a basic set of haploid genome, and then C-value paradox, complexity of genome doesn't corresponding to the complexity in terms of number of genes. That doesn't make sense for having different cell types and regulation. And they evolved into a concept of non-coding or junk DNA in a given genome, and the junk DNA is really important. That makes sense that the more the junk you have, the more highly complex organism, highly evolved you are. So what types of non-coding DNA are found in eukaryotic genomes, specifically talking about eukaryote, in what proportion of the genomes given a phylogenetic of eukaryotes? From where does this non-coding DNA come from? For example, they are coming from lower organisms, or they are coming from something de novo, or what affects, perfects, what functions this non-coding? Is it junk only, or it does have some functionality for the junk? We will see, and other species of the species. So concluding the summary of the class in next 2 slides, you go into the questions here. For example, the C-value, the total number of DNA. We expect that the more complex the genome, the more DNA should be there. So the C-value should be larger. For example, the more complex the organism is, the more genetic information it needs, larger the C-value. Smaller organisms, virus, bacteria, there is no room for excess DNA. Smaller C-value should be there as assumed. At lower level of complexity, it holds true in per se C value for viruses and bacteria, but it comes on to eukaryotes. There is no relationship between the C value larger or smaller. There's a lot of junk. That's called as C value paradox, and it is being given into C value enigma. So we will resume in half an hour or so. We will talk much about what is a non-coding DNA. You just go into, I will send probably, yeah, I will send the video by today. Okay, we'll meet in half an hour.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir.